I can't be the only one that feels like this is a very weird time. I'm sure that there's a better term to go with than weird, but if there is, it's not coming to me. We've been locked down for over a year thanks to coronavirus. We've worn masks whenever we've stepped more than a few steps outside of our homes, and all of our human interactions, the real kind, that doesn't involve staring at computer screens, have come from an oh so intimate 6 feet away. This was our reality for so long that sometimes it felt like it was always going to be that way. Now that we're getting back to the way things were before the virus, or at least some reasonable facsimile of pre-COVID life, it feels weird, right? The masks were annoying, sure, but don't you kind of miss them in a strange way? It's like a child being told that a nice soft safety blanket is no longer required. Dating is probably the most bizarre thing now. After sitting around in your home for a year eating nachos in your underwear and binging whatever cooking show happened to be streaming at the time, you're suddenly back out in the real world in places you thought you'd never be allowed to return to. To add to the awkwardness, you're sharing this experience with someone that you barely know. This was the position that I found myself in as I sat on a bench in front of an Italian restaurant waiting for my date to arrive. More than once I caught myself bouncing my leg up and down nervously. I had never been good on dates even before the pandemic, and after more than a year I wasn't just rusty. I was nearly hopeless. A lot of what made me feel so inadequate was the conversation. No matter how hard you try otherwise, the discussion always seems to come back to the pandemic. How did you spend your time during it? Did anyone you know catch the virus? How strange does it feel, being back out now? You know what follows that line of conversation? Silence. Very awkward silence. It's tough to recover after going down that path. I was so wrapped up in my thoughts that I barely registered my date's arrival. We had never met in person before, having just communicated through texts and the dating app we had both used. On the app she had gone by the name Lost Love, but outside of the digital world her name was Jenna Borden. She was a good deal shorter than I was, with the top of her dark hair coming up to the height of my shoulders. I felt like I was looming over her when I stood up to greet her. Her eyes were bright blue with flecks of purple throughout, a rather exotic look that I had never seen before. They peered up at me over the black face mask she was wearing. There's another thing that's much more awkward now than it used to be. We're so programmed now to avoid human contact that greeting one another normally is nearly a foreign concept. Not knowing what else to do, I raised my hand in a rather stupid wave. She returned the gesture, looking just as unsure about what to do as I was. I don't know what to do, Jenna admitted in a pleasant yet nervous voice. I feel like I've just come out of a coma, and I'm trying to figure out complicated calculus equations. I laughed. With 2 simple sentences she had broken the ice. Do you do that often? I asked. Emerge from comas with the express purpose of doing math. Oh, all the time. I've done it 3 times today already. I hope you don't mind the mask. I'm still a little paranoid, you know. I shook my head. I completely understand. I've been fully vaccinated for almost 2 months now, and I still carry one in my pocket just in case. Is this restaurant okay? We can go somewhere else if you want, somewhere with outdoor dining. No, it's fine. I actually love this place. Why don't we go inside and find a table? It turned out that I had been worried about nothing. Jenna was easy to talk to, and she seemed just as interested in avoiding certain subjects as I was. Our personalities were similar enough for us to enjoy each other's company without being so close that we agreed on everything. I've always found that to be important, as it's boring to be around someone that doesn't have something new and different to contribute to the conversation. She didn't remove her mask during the course of the meal. At first I thought that she was just going to wear it until the food arrived. That was the common practice that many people followed, so that would have made sense. When we got our drinks, however, she slid the straw up under the bottom of the mask and drank it that way. When she finished with a sip, she slipped the straw back out and placed the glass onto the table. I didn't find that as strange as I once might have. She had already told me that she was still worried about the virus after all. If anything, it made me feel more self-conscious about not wearing my own mask. She kept it on her face when the meal itself was served, and that struck me as odd. Most people would have at least pushed up the bottom of the mask to expose their mouths so that they could eat. Instead, she used one hand to pull the mask forward a bit, making just enough separation between it and her face to allow her fork access. It seemed like a cumbersome way to eat. I didn't say anything to her about it, of course. First of all, it wasn't any of my business, and secondly, I didn't want to make her feel as if I was judging her. It had been a while since I enjoyed a first date to this degree. I didn't want to say or do anything to jeopardize it, especially over something like this. We ended up foregoing dessert. Although she didn't say anything about it, I could tell that she was starting to get a bit uncomfortable being in such an enclosed space. I paid the check despite her protests that she wanted to split it. I very much believe in equality, but there are certain things that were ingrained in me as a child by my father, and being the one to pay on a date is one of those things. I followed it up by applying another of those lessons and opening the door for her as we went back outside. "So," Jenna said as we stood on the sidewalk. "What now?" "I honestly hadn't thought that far ahead," I replied sheepishly. "We're just a couple of blocks away from Pleasance Park. We could go for a walk there. Going for a casual stroll on a first date. How very old school of you. I think it's a fantastic idea." We chatted as we slowly walked through the small downtown Blackwood area. As we did, so I kept finding myself glancing down at her. There was a definite attraction. I couldn't quite tell if she was feeling the same thing, but I thought that she might be. This was going much better than I could have hoped. As we reached the final intersection, before coming to the park gates, Jenna sneezed. I turned towards her just in time to see an odd movement under her mask. It was like it had briefly pulled tighter against something, or that something had pushed against it from underneath. The movement was gone before I could even fully register what I had seen. I quickly shrugged it off. It had just been some trick of the light, or the soft breeze that was blowing through the streets had made it wrinkle and my eyes had misinterpreted things. We crossed the street and entered Pleasance Park. At the front was a playground filled with kids running around like maniacs, while their exasperated parents attempted to maintain some semblance of order. I smiled to myself. "Do you like kids?" Jenna asked, noticing my expression. "I do," I answered. "You?" She nodded. "Yeah. Well, I like them to a point. I'm not sure I follow. For the most part, I love being around them. Playtime, meals, all of that. I love that stuff. I start to become less enthralled with them when it's time for a temper tantrum or a diaper change." I laughed. "I can't argue with that. You know what I like more than children?" "What's that?" "Going down a slide." She pointed. "And there just so happens to be an open one right over there." I watched as she hurried over to the tall slide and started to climb up the steps. The pure joy she exuded was endearing. It was also something that I could understand and relate to. It wasn't just a slide. It was a symbolic return to a simpler time. I squinted slightly as I chided myself for sounding like a first-year college student that just had his first intro to poetry class. For a brief moment I considered going up the stairs after her. It had been at least a decade since I had been on a slide, and the urge to go down one again was strong. I was quite a bit larger than I had been then, however, and a quick look was all it took for me to see that I wasn't going to fit on it. Instead, I walked around to the far side to meet her at the bottom. As Jenna came down the slide towards me, I noticed the movement under her mask again. This time it wasn't just a small section of her covered face. Odd ripples and waves ran across the entire area. Her feet touched the ground, and as she began to stand up I saw that there were 4 bumps, each triangular with the longest points near her mouth. They were moving in and out like they were pulsing. By the time she was standing fully upright, the lumps were gone, and the face mask had returned to normal. She looked up at me with an odd expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. I couldn't explain away what I had seen this time. There was no doubt in my mind that I had definitely seen something. Something that wasn't natural. I glanced over at the children playing. If there really was something wrong with Jenna, something dangerous, I couldn't let on that I knew she wasn't what she appeared to be. Not here, anyway. I couldn't put the kids and their families at risk. I mustered up the best smile that I could. "Yeah, absolutely," I replied. I'm just a bit sad that I'm too big to take a trip down the slide myself. Oh, I don't know, she said with a tilt of her head. You look like you're the perfect size to me. She started walking towards one of the nearby trail makers. Pleasance Park was home to about a dozen hiking trails, each of which traveled through a different section of the dense woods. Not many people used them during this time of day. They were secluded and the perfect place to go when you wanted privacy. I almost didn't follow her. My first instinct was to bolt back towards downtown, but I looked back over at the playing children again. I couldn't do anything that might put them in harm's way. Reluctantly, I went after her, and we entered the tree line. Jenna reached out and took my hand. I smiled over at her, but all I could think about was how firm her grip was. It was like a vice, as if she was making sure that I couldn't get away. "This is okay, right?" she asked. "What?" I said dully as I was pulled out of my thoughts. "Me holding your hand. This is okay, right?" "Oh, yeah, it's fine." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She was testing me. Or maybe she wasn't, and instead she was luring me in. She must have realized that I was no longer at ease. Now that I knew something was wrong, I began to notice small things that I hadn't before. She kept sneaking looks at me as we walked, her eyes carefully inspecting me, before turning back towards the trail. Her walk was also just slightly odd. Her steps were light and didn't make as much noise as they should on the leaves and twigs. "Did you enjoy your lunch?" she asked, her eyes returning to my face. "It was good," I said. "How about yours?" "Not bad. I prefer my meat a bit more raw than they prepared the beef tagliatelle though. It looked pretty red to me." "What can I say?" she replied with a laugh. "I like my meat bloody." Jenna turned her attention forward once again, and I noticed more movement under the mask. The firm triangular objects pressed tightly against the cloth for a few seconds before retracting back towards her face. My mind flashed to images I had seen of insect mandibles opening and closing. I felt panic rising in me. I forced it down. Obviously I was in a dangerous situation, but the only way I was going to get through it was if I kept my wits about me. We came to a narrow section of the trail. The brush was thick enough on both sides that it only allowed for us to walk through one at a time. I gave her a smile and motioned for her to go first. It was, after all, the gentlemanly thing to do. She released my hand and started through. I let her get a few feet ahead of me before taking the knife out of my pocket. Slowly unfolding the blade from the handle, I followed her down the trail, expecting her to turn and attack me at any moment. This would be the perfect time. We were all alone, and because of the dense brush I wouldn't be able to easily escape. Somehow I knew that I was out of time and she was about to strike. It was now or never. Gritting my teeth, I lunged and wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Before she could even cry out in surprise, the knife was cutting across her throat. I shoved her forward so that the blood wouldn't get on me. She stumbled a few steps before collapsing face first to the ground. Being careful not to touch the growing pool of blood on the dirt path, I rolled her over just in time to hear the final gurgling sounds come out of her severed larynx and see the light fade out of her purple-flecked eyes. I ignored all of that and grabbed the mask with my right hand. I ripped it off and stood back up. Jenna's face was completely normal. With the exception of a small scar on her bottom lip, the skin was unblemished and there was no sign of any sort of abnormality. It certainly wasn't the face of a monster. I sighed as I licked the blood off of the knife. There was no point in beating myself up over it. It was an easy error to make. I had made it several times over the past year, and I'd probably do it again at some point. Honest mistakes happened. I grabbed the body by the feet and started pulling it off the side of the trail. It was best to get rid of it before some hiker came across it. Who knew how someone would react to seeing a dead body in the woods? The pandemic made some people act a little crazy, after all. She waits for me in the tub. I failed, and now, I don't know what to do. To clarify, I write about and, sometimes, perform popular rituals I find online. Yeah, it's kind of a stupid hobby, but I thought it was fun. I even made money from recording some of them and posting them on YouTube. It also boosted my confidence. Sad, but whenever I performed a ritual successfully, or had a close call, I felt as if I escaped death's grasp. As if I was slowly building a type of immunity to it. But, after this last one, I now see that I was blinded by my arrogance. I know she is waiting for me in the tub. If you're wondering what ritual I messed up, it was the bath game. If you are on this website, though, then you probably already know about it. At least, I hope you do. I hope you can help me. God, I hope one of you can. I'll start from the beginning. I was, like most of these types of stories, bored and out of ideas. I had just read To Me Knows Hell to a live audience on my YouTube channel, and was scrolling through Reddit for new ideas, when I came upon someone's account of their bath game. I already knew a bit about it from other people's stories and online narrations, but I never thought about performing it before. It just never caught my attention or imagination like the other rituals did. Some girl trips and kills herself on the bathtub's tap, becomes an angry ghost, and ends up becoming a ritual just doesn't seem as cool as a cursed poem or a way of asking spirits questions. But, as I said, I was bored and out of ideas. So I read the ritual and prepared. It started off fine. I turned the lights off, managed to get into the tub with my eyes closed, and started to wash my hair as I kept repeating, Daruma-san fell down. If it wasn't for my imagination conjuring up her gruesome fall, and her blood dripping down into the tub, this would have been a relaxing experience. Soon after, I felt something rise up behind me. The smell of mangoes, coconuts, and sulfur started filling the room, causing me to gag. That was my cue to leave the bath with a final question: why did you fall in the bathtub? I remember walking to my room, concentrating on not tripping over the pile of clothes I had left in front of the washer, getting into bed, and falling into a dreamless sleep. The next day was ordinary in the worst way possible. Throughout the day, I constantly looked over my shoulder. I even only went to the restroom at my part-time job, whenever I was sure someone else was in there. And nothing happened. No lady in a white dress several feet away, staring at me intently. No odd blend of sweet and rotten assailing my nose. Nor the feeling that I was being watched by a malicious unseen pair of eyes. It got to a point where I thought that I was in the clear. That, for some reason, the ritual failed, even though I performed everything right. I guess that's why I did what I did. I fell asleep. I knew that it was a bad idea, but I hadn't seen Daruma-san all day. I figured that if I shouted Kida at my bathroom and performed the karate chop, it would still end the game. It didn't. This must have angered her. Because when I, supposedly, woke up at 2:30 a.m., I couldn't move. I know what sleep paralysis is, I've experienced it before, so I wasn't scared when I realized I couldn't turn my head. I only started to feel afraid when I heard the sound of running water surrounding me, and soft squishy footsteps making their way towards my room. I could, once again, smell the strange scent of sulfur and fake fruit growing stronger. I shifted my eyes towards my door, trying to remember if I locked it that night when I heard it slowly creak open. Standing there was the silhouette of a woman, neither tall nor short, but entirely blocking my only exit. She stood there as I tried to decide whether I really wanted to keep my eyes open or force them shut. Before I could figure out which was worst, she ran right for me. Whether it was due to the surge of fearful adrenaline or pure luck, but before she reached me, I managed to scream, "Tomer." I managed to stop her, but she was now right next to me. Her clammy hand was on my bare shoulder. I could finally see her. Everyone online always describes her with long black hair that slowly sways from an unknown breeze, and an empty socket that still had blood oozing down from it. They were right. But they never mentioned how her skin still had old water sliding around on it. That you could see her darkened blood vessels underneath nigh-translucent skin, or that her remaining eye was cloudy with age as she watched me. They never talked about how unseen water dripped from the ceiling on top of your head every few seconds. An unnerving countdown to what would be a grisly end. The sound of rising water was louder now. I could see steam rising from the edges of my bed, but I never took my eyes off her. We just stared at each other as the water rose up over my bed, waking me from my sleep. If it weren't for the wet footsteps leading up to my bed from the bathroom, I would have written it off as nothing more than a bad dream. Since then, I haven't slept, and I've been avoiding my bathroom. I keep going over to my neighbor's apartment to use theirs, saying that there's something wrong with my bathroom's plumbing. But I'm not sure how long I can keep doing this. Each time I walk past my bathroom, I can hear water sloshing around in the tub and feel the faint touch of steam slip between the cracks of the closed door. Each time I close my eyes, I hear her whispering about how she will drag me into the bathtub to join her. And the worst part is, it's 3 a.m. and I really need to pee. So please hurry, she's waiting for me in the tub. The Gallery of Henry Beauchamp. If you go into this one tiny, dingy one-story bar in Paris, and the right bartender is behind the counter that night, you might be able to see a very exclusive gallery show of the lost works of one Henry Beauchamp. But to get in, you have to prove you're a devotee of the artist to get in. You'll be asked, in clear and perfect English, what would like to partake of this glorious night. Answer absinthe, no matter what. Any other drink, from whiskey to water, will kill you as you sleep. The next question will regard the type, and you must answer one of two things. The stuff that man himself could not bear to take, or the good stuff. The best stuff. If you ask for any other absinthe, in any other way, you will be plagued by nightmares for 13 days. Each night's dream will be more horrible than the last, until, upon the 13th dream, your nightmare will follow you, every moment of your waking and sleeping life. Don't try and cheat the barkeep, the door locked behind you. You have to drink what he gives you, doom or not. That such a powerful man granted you audience should be enough. Besides, I've heard that the dying complimented his drinks in their death throes. If you make it that far before sealing your fate, the bartender will say, "Be sure you handle this with care. This is the finest I have." From here, you may do one of two things. Say, word for word, "I overestimated my fortitude, and I bid you good eve." If the barkeep nods, you may leave the door you entered, unharmed and with nothing gained and nothing lost, except the time spent inside. Or you can go on. You will be given a glass with a 7-sided rim, with each side twisting ever so delicately around the basin, until forming a sleek and simple handle. You will also receive a very special absinthe spoon, in the shape of a key. The holes at the key's top serve as the draining point for the alcohol, to pour over the sugar cube. And, of course, an unmarked bottle, stripped long ago of its label, scraps of paper sticking to its sides, covered in the rot of the decades past. The spoon is completely flat, but has two distinct sides, one with a groove along the shaft of the key, and one without. Turn the shaft down, so its groove will be face down. If you attempt this face up, your absinthe will taste foul, your nose will burn, and your eyes will shrivel in their sockets with unspeakable horrors not of this world. Now, if your spoon is the right way up, begin preparing the absinthe as one would. Put the sugar on the spoon, and pour the alcohol over, so it gains its color and special qualities. Say cheers to your friend, the barkeep, and bottoms up. If you don't, the absinthe will burn every innard it touches with the power and pain of sulfuric acid. If you've done it right, the already dim lights will go off, and darkness will consume the bar. Don't be afraid, the darkness is the cue that you've been approved for the exhibit. Wait out the darkness, and keep silent as the dead, lest the bartender decide to make you so. Eventually, not too long, 2 to 3 minutes, a green floodlight will shine brightly on a door on the far wall of the bar. The bar will be bathed in green, and not just from the floodlight. Little luminescent spheres will gently drift through the room, and the barkeep will no longer be there, nor any other unassuming patron inside before. There's no danger by this point, consider it a safe point. If you didn't finish the absinthe, you don't have to, but you might need the alcohol. Either way, take the spoon, and put it in the keyhole of the green-lit portal's doorknob. It will fit perfectly, and reach the end of the keyhole with a resounding click. Inside is a small elevator, with the most beautiful woman any mortal eyes can imagine, bathed in the green glow in just such an angle, that the light refracts beyond her into the shape of wings. The green fairy herself will ask you, going up, and considering all the trouble you went through, it would only make sense to say yes. Now, you have one more hurdle to clear. She will ask you, as you cross the line from the bar to the compartment, how would you compare Beauchamp's surrealism to that of, say, René Magritte? For your reply, you must say, "I've come to see more than art tonight." If you don't, the green floodlight will blow out, the doors will slam shut, and the elevator will plummet through a seemingly infinite blackness before real light grows brighter as the elevator nears the very depths of hell. Now, if your elevator begins to go up, the green light will also fade, but in its place will be the cool glow of the moon. But, before you even recognize it, the elevator will reach the top of its, well, let's call it a shaft, to not get too intricate. Now, I'm not as sure about this as the rest, but I've heard that, if the green fairy kisses you on the cheek as she leaves the elevator, you will always be blessed with a creative inspiration, a permanent, ever-changing muse. You can't ask her, you can't kiss her, she has to do it of her own volition. If not, well, nothing, but no reason to do it anyway, and anger the woman who is responsible for keeping the Beauchamp painting safe for so many years. You will enter, from the elevator, a turn-of-the-century parlor, with a large poster of Henry Beauchamp on the left side of the opposite wall. On the right is a door. Taking the time to read the poster is a fairly good idea, as it explains the very significance of Mr. Beauchamp. You see, he was a struggling surrealist in the 1920s, always making art to try to be free of all premeditation, and managed to do so. You see, after one night in a tiny, dingy one-story bar in Paris, he began to paint patterns. First it was geometric patterns, then complete fractals, then images that would be in the newspaper the next day, then next week, then from 50 years ago, 100 in the future, 200 in the past. Then, on his last night of life, he kidnapped 3 young girls from their homes at night, murdered them, and painted his finest masterpieces in reds and yellows, with the blood and bile of virgins. He committed suicide immediately after painting exactly 13 of these. These are behind the door. The first 6, from the left, show, from left to right, the genesis of the universe. The only true visage of God is viewable to the eyes of man, the true image of Jesus Christ, the sprawling clouds of heaven, every pope from the first to faces not yet recognizable, and a portrait of Jesus' appearance in his second coming. The other 6, on the right, show, from right to left, the cataclysmic of the universe. The only true visage of Satan is viewable to the eyes of man, the true image of Judas, the sprawling flames of hell, every human embodied demon from the first to faces not yet recognizable, and a portrait of the Antichrist in his second coming. Now, 6 and 6 makes 12. But what of the 13th? This 13th painting is turned around on its wall pin, the image facing the wall. The space around it is roped up at a very wide diameter, and under the flipped image is a sign, in 3 languages. The top is in the scriptures of the seraphim, the bottom in the runes of the highest demonic orders, and in the middle, in Roman letters. Do not touch. Now, like the kiss, I can't say this part with as much certainty, but all the same, I heard that, somehow, as he died, Beauchamp flayed his skin, his organs, his very soul, into some sort of collage. How he took his dead body and created such a horrific masterpiece, I could never say, nor would I ever dare to. So, if you make it, maybe you can flip the canvas over and tell me sometime. You can tell me about it over a drink. The hole in the wall. It's seeming a lot more absurd as time passes. 12 days since I moved my shit into my friend's place, so I want to get this out there and have people call bullshit and pass judgment, because I think it'll make me feel better. I've moved out all my stuff, I've already called the cops and informed my absentee landlord. I've done all the proper things, so there's nothing left to do but share my little fucked up city living story. About 6 months ago, my girlfriend and I moved into an apartment in the Benton Park neighborhood of St. Louis. About 2 weeks after we move in, her grandfather, who raised her, has a fucking stroke, and she ends up going home to Twin Oaks to take care of him. She was living with him full time until we can find out how to afford a nurse or hospice. Anyway, I'd been living in our 1-bedroom all alone for the last half a year. It's beautiful, newly remodeled, double-paned windows, great insulation. The best a couple of Hicks-turned yuppies could want. It's got a couple of weird things about it, as you'll see. There's only 4 units in the building, on the 2nd and 3rd floors. We're on the top floor. The first weird thing about the place we noticed right when we moved in. The walls and floors are paper thin. I could hear every word of my downstairs neighbor's conversation at all times. I know when they take a shower, I know when they fuck, and I'm sure they know the same about us. It's weird, the more info we had on each other, the less we wanted to actually know each other. They moved out 6 weeks ago. Then the other 2 units went vacant a week later. It was kind of weird, but also kind of awesome. I could finally stomp around, watch porn and play a rock band at full volume. About 4 weeks ago, it got weird. It was about 1 a.m., and I was going to bed, and I started to hear this noise from the empty apartment downstairs. Really quiet at first, but sustained. It sounded halfway between a hushed conversation, with only one person talking, and small motor running. Just a babbling, not quite regular drone. Freaked me out at first, but I rationalized that it was some plumbing, or the refrigerator downstairs. Something I'd never heard over my downstairs neighbors farting and snoring. I learned to live with it as it rose and fell every evening. Pretty soon a steady tapping sound started in with mumbling. I know it sounds fucked up, but when you hear it every night for a while, you just make excuses for it. Then I kept hearing boards creaking. It's spring, my first in this building, so I assumed it was just the old boards under the new drywall settling. Then one night, as I was brushing my teeth, there was a mighty dry thump right behind me. I just about stabbed myself with my toothbrush. I stayed really still till I was sure there wasn't anyone in the house, and then turned on all the lights in the house. This is when I noticed a peculiarity in the remodeling. On the other side of the bathroom, where I heard the thump, is the hall closet. I open it up and switch on the light, expecting a box to have fallen off the shelves, but it's all gravy inside. I tap on the wall between the closet and the bathroom, and it sounds oddly hollow. And I start to realize that the closet isn't as wide as I think it should be based on the bathroom. I pace it out with my feet, and then a tape measure just to confirm. Sure enough, there's about 303 of space in between the 2 walls that I thought were adjacent. Again, rationalization time. Surely there's extra insulation there to keep the bathroom warm, or maybe walls are thicker than I imagined, because fuck, I've never built a house. So in this one thick wall, some huge fucking rat must have taken a tumble and freaked me out. No big deal. I felt a lot better at the time, even better when it was the first night in a while without that weird noise below me. So, everything is fine until last Friday night. It's about 2 in the morning and I'm home late from the bar, not as drunk as I want, and remembering that left all my clean laundry in the dryer before I went out. One thing sticks out as I climb the stairs. The door to the apartment below me is closed. It's been open since the neighbors vacated. I got kind of used to seeing an empty mirror image of my place every day when I walked past. Maybe the landlord was showing it to people today. Rationalize, rationalize, rationalize. I bag up a small load of laundry and climb down the back porch steps to the laundry room, which is really just part of the garage, but the staircase in on the outside of the building, and it gives each floor a little shared porch. I get down there and into the little room, and I start bagging up all my clothes into this big black duffel bag. 2 things you should know about me at this point. I turn off every light when I leave a room. No matter what. My dad used to beat the shit out of me when the energy bill was a penny over the norm. And I also lock the door every time I go through it. Hell, I even locked the back door when I went down to get my laundry. I start back up the stairs and on the first flight I look up, straight to my bedroom window. The light is on. And there's a silhouette against the closed blinds. I pissed myself a little and every hair on my neck snapped to fucking attention. And then the light goes out. It happened in less than a second. 10 seconds later I'm still frozen in place, and trying to figure out if I just saw what I think I saw. Rationalization lost out, thank fucking God, and I snuck down the stairs and out through the garage. I called a cab and stood across the street from the building looking at my living room window. About 5 minutes before the cab showed up, the Venetian blinds parted slightly for a few seconds, like someone was looking down on me. Then nothing. I stayed at a hotel that weekend, then a couple of buddies of mine came back with me on Sunday to see how much stuff had been stolen. It was all there. My laptop was still charging, my brand new plasma TV. The doors were locked. I moved it all out that afternoon. Well, my friends were with me, and I had the daylight on my side. I checked out the apartment below me. The downstairs closet had the same abnormally thick wall. Only someone had hammered through this wall, a big round jagged hole, exposing the tiny crawl space between. And in this space flat against the wall was a cheap hardware store ladder, leading up through the darkness to the space behind the walls in my apartment. I don't know how he got into my apartment from there, maybe through the heating vents in my ceiling. I really don't give a shit. All I care about is never seeing that building again. I mailed my keys to the landlord, told the whole thing to a terminally disinterested cop. Done my part, moving on. Quit my shitty job, which might be the one good thing about this. I'm typing this at a friend's house on his Wi-Fi. I was going to take this convenient time to get the fuck out of Dodge and move in with my girlfriend and her grandpa, but he died 2 nights ago. Still think I'd like to head back into the country, but I guess this is like a clean slate for us. I haven't told her yet, and I'm not sure if I will. Told her our landlord went apeshit and kicked me out. She's already got issues with security and I don't want to add to them. But I don't ever want to live in an apartment or hear people moving beneath my feet or on the other side of a wall. Never again. The Smiling Man in Black. When I was younger, I lived with my father and his mother. I was the only child, a girl at that, and my father was very protective of me. My grandmother, on the other hand, hated me. At first, she would just yell at me and shove me around when Dad was at work. It escalated quickly after he started working longer hours to make ends meet. I rarely saw my father at that point. For 4 years, she did things I can't even bring myself to really think about, not enough to write it. For those 4 years, I prayed and prayed for release. I prayed and wished for her to die. To God, to whoever would listen. My dad probably would have believed me if I'd had a chance to talk to him, but she'd made me feel as though I were an abomination over the years that I couldn't bear it anymore. After she killed my kitten and made me bury it, at the age of 13, I attempted suicide by hanging myself inside my closet. Apparently, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing, and the bar in the closet that I tied myself to fell on my head and knocked me the fuck out. I pulled myself up and headed to sneak into the bathroom without the monster cunt to catch me and give me another beating. As I left my bedroom, I caught a whiff of something very fucking rancid, like vomit, burning flesh, and blood, mixed together, warm. I knew all of these smells fairly well, considering what my grandmother did to me, and I thought for a moment it might have been my imagination, or her making something disgusting for me to eat to torture me more. But I recognized the separate smells in a way I'd never smelled something like this. As I got closer and closer to the stairs overlooking the living room, which was right across from the bathroom, I started to hear something. Faintly, I remember hearing it a few feet back, but suddenly it seemed so much louder. My head was pounding, my heart was pounding, and all I could hear was gurgle, smack smack, squish squish, reeb. The mere idea of peeking over the stairs and into the living room was suddenly so profoundly frightening that I almost just went back into my bedroom, but strangely enough, it was amazingly easy to just do it anyway. What I saw in the living room will never leave me for as long as I live, in more than one sense. My grandmother was lying on the ground. There was someone wearing black kneeling over her. They were both covered in blood. The person's head was moving rhythmically over its hands, which held what I realized was some organ in her body. The person didn't look up, and I was scared silent. There was so much blood. So much blood. The sound of gnawing, the smacking mouth, the snapping of her organs as they were ripped from my grandmother's body, what was left of it, the brutally grotesque side of her chest cavity having been torn open, of her body being consumed little by little filled me with terror I had never known before. I didn't know what to do. It ate her body, slowly, seeming to enjoy every bite it took, its body swaying and moving so unnaturally that I couldn't even think it was human. I couldn't stop watching, I couldn't run away, the sheer terror of it choked the scream I would have let out. It stopped, I stopped. It looked up at me, after what seemed an eternity, releasing the contents of its mouth. Gory pieces and blood, some brown at that point, covered most of its face. What I could see of the face, it seemed to be male, very pale in patches. Where eyes were supposed to be were black pits, pits that seemed to dilate, expand and retract. He had no lips, but his mouth twitched, like some kind of hologram going in and out, slowly smiling, the smile expanding beyond normal human ability. I vomited and fainted. I woke up, my father was home and worrying over me. My grandmother's body was gone along with all of the blood. Where's Grandma? Where is she? I kept asking him, until I had to stop, from the look in his eyes. He told me her heart was bad, and she was in heaven now. I couldn't believe it. That was impossible, right? Did I imagine that whole thing? At her funeral, on the way to her burial site, I saw the man again. He looked more human, but I knew it was him. I remembered that smile. That day, I smiled back. I still have dreams about that man. Sometimes I think I see him in public. Even when I don't see him, I can feel him there. He's always there, watching me.